What's up, guys? This episode of the podcast is brought to you by HD Muscle. HD Muscle is more than a supplement company. They are a team of like-minded individuals who have come together to create a truly superior product line with zero compromises. In order to create the world's most premium supplement brand that is synonymous with today's top-level bodybuilders, athletes, and rising stars, HD Muscle had to step outside the normal parameters and practices of the industry. No limitations are placed on research or innovation when creating their superior product line. HD Muscle works with the most talented formulators and experts in the industry who share their core values, beliefs, and vision to create a line of products that can truly help you to push yourself past your limits and achieve your true potential. HD Muscle refuses to cut corners or limit their creativity based on monetary restrictions. HD Muscle will never sacrifice results for profit or promote an inadequate product. Integrity is everything. For free shipping right now on orders over $99, head over to www.hdmuscle.com and use the discount code HELLRUNE at the checkout. To stay updated on the latest news and releases from HD Muscle, follow at hd.muscle on Instagram. This episode is also brought to you by Stay Classy Meats to help make it easier and more affordable to gain access to high-quality meats direct to your door. Stay Classy Meats are a small batch supplier of high-quality meats from Montana. They have a strong inventory and are committed to quickly turning orders around to keep your freezer stocked. Stay Classy Meats have adjusted internal operations to serve you more efficiently during this difficult time. This means packing orders daily and shipping out on Mondays and Tuesdays. I'm proud to stand behind this company and offer a viable alternative to ravaged grocery stores and huge lineups. Head on over to www.stayclassymeats.com and use the discount code HELLRUNE at the checkout to save 10% off your entire order. Stay healthy, stay safe. My guest today has helped thousands of men around the world through his philosophical writing and public speaking on masculine issues. He is the author of The Way of Men, Becoming a Barbarian, and A More Complete Beast. Please give it up for the all-father of masculinity himself, Jack Donovan. Three, two, one. Jack Donovan, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I just got to say, first of all, you know, it reminds me how much more work I have to do when I invite a guest on, and his video quality is 10 times as good as mine, and he has a fucking flaming solar cross sitting behind him, and I've got my laundry hiding in the back on the couch. I had to give you some props for the backdrop because it's way fucking better than mine.
Thanks. Yeah, I got it set up.
Yeah, it's looking good. So I just want to say thanks for coming on, because out of all of the polls that I've done about who I should bring on this podcast, your name constantly came up every single time, multiple times. So, it's just, I was really looking forward to this discussion. I'm grateful to have you on because we kind of have very similar demographics, and a lot of what I write about has been influenced by what you've put out there. And that's kind of helped me start to form my own ideas and maybe think about some of the ideas you've put out there in a different way. So, also, I wanted to say congratulations on the relaunch of the podcast, Start the World podcast. I believe I released my first episode around the same time that you relaunched it. So it's been really interesting kind of seeing which types of people you're having on. And it's even made me think twice about who I have on and what I talk about, because we kind of pander to the same demographic, even some of the same people as far as, the audience goes and things like that. So I'm hyper aware of what you're doing all of the time and what you're putting out all of the time, so that I'm not just sending the same information out there, or having to compete with some of the guys that you're talking about, or talking to, pardon me.
Yeah.
So, Yeah, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that and what it's kind of been like and what the motivation was to relaunch Start the World and to really promote like these long form discussions, uncensored, kind of exploring some ideas that a lot of people aren't talking about. And maybe you can meditate on that a little bit and talk about why you relaunched Start the World.
Okay, yeah. I honestly, I'm working on a book this year, and I was like, well, I'm not going to be putting out essay after essay after essay because I'm working on a book,
Right.
and I shouldn't be blowing my load. It should all go in the book, right? So I was like, well, how can I stay relevant, and how can I keep people interested in what I'm doing? And a lot of people for years have been asking me to do Start the World again, and I didn't like it the first time I was doing it. I didn't think I was good at it, and I didn't like the format, but the technology has gotten better. And I found when I was just doing audio and without the video interaction, it just started to sound like talking on the phone, like yakking.
Yeah.
We're all like giggling on the phone. I'm like, this isn't a good product anymore. I didn't really like it. But no one really gave me that feedback. That was just how I felt about it.
Right.
And so I just kind of stopped doing it. And it was kind of a chore when I was doing it. And now, actually, it's fun. I have it set up with a scheduling app where people can schedule time with me on 2 days. There's a day that I record, and like I have another show that I'm going to record later today. Like that someone's going to be on, and that I'm going to be a guest on. And I just it actually, because I live in a really small town, it actually gives me an opportunity to talk to a lot of people that that are interesting. So I mean, it's actually something I look forward to now instead of it being a chore, which is nice.
Yeah, and you've really kind of gone the route of it being very kind of candid conversations, and their conversations so far, at least with guys that you seem really interested in talking to. So one kind of beef I have with a lot of podcasts is when they're super edited, and there isn't a lot of nuance between the question and answer, and it kind of just starts to sound like TV. And that's kind of what I think should be avoided when you're putting on a podcast, because the whole point is that you can enjoy the sloppiness of a natural conversation, right? Like that's kind of what makes it entertaining for me, especially because like I almost kind of look at it from the perspective of an artist or from a musician, where the best records that have ever been put out have been recorded in one room with one microphone, and somebody fucks up catastrophically at some point, but that gets remembered as this very charming moment on a record, or a charming aspect of a piece of art that people then 100 years later will question. So that just kind of gives it flavor that I really like, and the fact that you don't have to be confined to like 1 hour and whoever's rules that you're trying to abide by to make sure you don't say the wrong thing that's going to offend somebody.
Well, that's still real. I mean, you still have to worry about that a little bit because I'm not going to put something on YouTube that's going to get deplatformed, and so you have to, we live in the world such as it is. So there's certain things like we don't need to go down that road. I mean, generally it's been pretty open, because most of the stuff I want to talk about really isn't a problem anyway. It's only a problem for like, people who just hate men, but generally I'm not really saying anything that's, I think, problematic for normal people. So that's good. And then the other thing I like about doing the podcast right now is, especially with the video, I think people get a sense of who I am a little bit more, because like you said, it is uncensored to a certain extent, and you're like, you get to see me laugh. Rather than like, I guess I have a certain image. My jiu-jitsu coach asked me, he said that someone asked, he's like, oh, does Jack Donovan train out at your gym? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, is he an asshole? Because he looks like he'd be an asshole. And, and anyone who knows me knows that I'm not like that at all. But I guess, I have the Germanic frown. And if I'm not actively smiling, I'm frowning. So like
resting bitch face.
Exactly. Yeah. So, it gives a chance for people to see, I think, who I actually am. So
yeah, I think it's really positive too, because you have a certain amount of control of how people receive your message when it's just tough looking photos and very sort of assertive and deep thought about masculinity, and especially just talking about masculinity in general, you automatically get looped into the crowd of misogynists just by talking about it sometimes.
Yeah.
And people will make that assumption because, this guy's a male activist and he's a fucking asshole.
It can look like a hard style.
Yeah.
Like it could come off as a hard style really quickly. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not like that at all, but
no, but that's kind of funny thing is because to hear someone kind of make that assumption or impression, but it's like after kind of talking to you a little bit more without any of the other sort of external factors like Instagram and photos or any of the other kind of production that goes into presenting oneself, you're just like a really nice guy who really likes books and like nerdy, cool stuff and maybe lifting weights a little bit. It's really funny the way people come to these assumptions based on what you talk about. I wanted to ask you, since you have now been spending a lot of time doing the podcasting versus blogging and that sort of thing, and you've done so many of these in the past, we were just talking about this right before the podcast started. And I was kind of curious from your point of view, having been asked so many of the same questions, having a lot of similar interviews and stuff like that. And you get very good at being interviewed. A lot of your ideas, you're kind of anticipating what people are going to ask you. And so when I started this podcast, I actually didn't find it incredibly natural to interview people. And I still don't. It's still something that I'm working on. And it was actually something that I decided to start because I was very conscious of the fact that I was not as good at speaking and drawing from my ideas as I was at putting them down on paper. But I was curious to ask you, now that you're conducting the interviews, how has that been different from being asked the questions, and if you find that at all difficult to do, or kind of being in a different, sitting in the other chair, I guess, so to speak?
Well, it's a skill like anything else, you get better at it over time. And I don't think I'm great at it yet, but fortunately I tend to pick guests who have a lot to say. So sometimes you can just kind of press play on them and then they'll talk for an hour and then I don't have to think of anything at all.
Yeah.
So that's kind of helpful. But with some of the higher profile guys I've had on recently, I definitely did spend some time listening to their other interviews that they've done and that kind of thing. And just so I had some stuff in my mind to ask them. I usually don't go in with straight questions, but I have a couple topics that I want to cover, and see where, you can fit them in, but at the end of the day, what people like to hear is that you're having an intelligent conversation that you'd be having at a bar.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Or yeah, exactly. Or having dinner, like this sounds like something natural that would happen. And that's what's kind of more pleasing to the ear. Yeah. And I thought it was cool that you decided to bring on one of your friends as the very first guest. And this was still one of my favorite and I think noteworthy episodes, even though it was a short episode, was your discussion with Tanner Guzzi.
Yeah. Tanner's a very unlikely good friend of mine. And so actually he's my life coach right now. I actually pay him to kind of keep tabs on me, make sure I'm not screwing up too much. So I talk to him about once a week about, writing and getting stuff done and so forth. But he's a good dude. And I had him on first. It was actually my first episode, but I put it out later. Mm-hmm. But I had him on first just to kind of, work through the process.
I thought it was really interesting because, like you said, you guys have such different backgrounds. I think he's a Mormon. You're obviously a pagan. You and I are both interested in a lot of the same kind of mythology and ritual and that kind of fantastical stuff. And then he's like a father and a husband, which obviously you and I are not, but you guys are able to connect on so many things that I guess some of these stories and archetypes and and different things like that draw a lot of the same things out of you, or contain things that you can draw out of it that are very similar and very applicable to the stuff that both you and Tanner are talking about.
Yeah, well, he's actually he's really interested in aesthetics, and obviously that's where we have a big overlap. And but aesthetics for a philosophical reason, not necessarily not just aesthetics for aesthetics, but aesthetics because he thinks beauty is important in the world. And and he's into higher ideals, and also very interested in what I'm doing in ritual because he's interested in ritual generally. Like in a broad sense, ritual and symbolism, and that's all important to him. And I was talking to him about it the other day, and he actually said, in his religion, there's one religion, and then everything else is kind of like an offshoot of it. So they're all connected, and they're all the same thing. So he's interested in all of them.
Yeah.
So it's rather than being kind of like I can't listen to other viewpoints, it's kind of the opposite. He thinks there's value in all of them in some way. They've just been changed from the original. And so, so he's very open-minded in that way. And I don't think people would think that that's the case.
Yeah. You'd always kind of assume, especially with kind of, obviously any of the religions revolving around Christianity or offshoots of Christianity, everybody assumes that you are like a closed-minded ape, basically, that doesn't understand logic or reason.
I think that carries through from, like the evangelicals were really important in like 90s politics, and there's a part of America, mostly in San Francisco and like other places, that they still think that that's real. Like those people really aren't that influential in politics or society anymore, but they really were in the 90s. And so there's this big, I think prejudice still there about the way that particular group of Christians behaved at that time. They kind of blankets that on all the other Christians, and it's not right. Most of the Christian guys I know are not like that.
It's interesting too, because I used to be one of those guys that had never read the Bible, but was against everything that had to do with Christianity. I'm not even entirely sure why, but it just seemed like the thing to do when you listen to heavy metal and you don't have a very good understanding of the world.
Yeah.
You kind of want to hate everything that represents the establishment or control and things like that. But one thing I've started to really embrace, especially after embracing paganism, is the value in these stories and the values in the doctrines and the underlying moral and intrinsic principles that are embedded in these tales, if you want to call them that. Yep. We don't entirely know exactly what they are, but we know that men wrote them, and we know that we base a lot of our lives off of that. But the thing is, I now, having spent more time being interested in paganism, that has allowed me to open up to all these other ideas because of how much I've gained from it. And now I'm seeing why a Mormon would gain from what they believe, or what they teach, or why somebody who studies Greek philosophy would be able to take that mythology and apply it to their life. But they're also interconnected, especially when it comes to masculinity. And one thing I noticed, and I kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on it, is that people who are self-proclaimed, I guess, agnostics or just that don't believe in anything.
Sure.
What I've noticed is that I don't think those people are nearly as happy as people who believe in something, even if they have a respectful skepticism about what they believe.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's the angry atheists. I think like the Richard Dawkins kind of like angry atheist guy. Like, if we just abolished religion from everything, then the world would be peaceful, and that's not true. And and there's a lot of people who think that way, and also they think that they worship science in this weird way, that they think that science provides them with answers that it actually doesn't. And in actually the new book I'm writing, I have a little thing about this. It's fascinating to watch scientists who hate religion look for God. in space. You know, like, what are they doing? They're trying to find, basically, it's like, it's like the Aliens movie. They're trying to find the fucking engineers.
Yeah.
You're like, where did I come from? They're still doing the same thing. They just want it to be aliens and not like anyone they've ever heard of before. They want aliens to be God. And then it still doesn't answer the question, who made the aliens?
Yeah.
Like, then it goes one step back, and it's an unsolvable question. So it's like pretending that you know the answer to that question just makes you seem dumb to me, really, at that point. Like, it makes you seem I definitely don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, it's because ultimately what it comes down to is however educated you are, you're still seeking to discover whoever it is that's going to be able to tell you what the hell we're doing here.
Right. And no one ever will.
No.
No one, because no one knows that answer either. We're all just, monkeys looking at the sky.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's really cool that when you're able to get to a point in your life where you can humble yourself and actually learn something from somebody who believes something completely different than you, you can gain so much from that, and you will at least find from those conversations, no matter who you're talking to, something that you can learn from a long form discussion if you're genuinely interested in learning versus convincing somebody else why their ideas are wrong.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. And so I really wanted to talk about Tanner mostly because I feel like there's this strong connection between what Tanner teaches with aesthetics and what you have talked about in the past surrounding this idea of ego and the misrepresentation of ego in society. It's the first time that I ever actually had someone really explain that to me, because ego is always used as like a dirty word, especially for men, and the kind of connection between what Tanner talks about and what you had explained about that is this importance of how you're received by the rest of the world and this self-representation. And particularly in assertive men who are trying to establish themselves in the world and who are aggressively striving towards who they want to be, they're obviously going to have a greater sense of self. And so I think that maybe you can just explain a little bit about what the motivation is behind cutting people down for trying to appear as they want to be received in the world, why that would be a negative thing, and why we're trying to push people towards apathy when it comes to their appearance and apathy when it comes to branding themselves.
Well, I mean, that's a lot of different things. Obviously, ego is just Latin for I. And, like, people have turned it into something that it's taken on a life of its own, whereas ego, it tends to mean arrogance to most people. And that's not really what it means. And that's not even the psychologists who are writing about it weren't talking about it in that way. And I think arrogance is arrogance. And, you can say arrogance and humility is also, you can have a big ego and care about yourself, and I want to make my mark in the world and whatever, but you can still have some humility. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think that's a balance that I think people lose, but I don't know, as far as obviously, anyone who is in control of anything doesn't want you to actually have any self-respect, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty much how it works. You're easier to rule if you don't have an ego. If you don't care about what happens to yourself, and you don't want to be better, and you don't believe that you can be better. Because that's what that really is, right? You're like, I believe in my own potential, and I care about it. And, if people, like that whole like self-acceptance thing that everyone loves to do. Like you're wonderful just the way you are.
I wrote an article about that, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Of course you're not perfect the way you are.
No, that's terrible.
You didn't pop out of the womb and graduate from middle school, and that is the best version of yourself that you're ever going to be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're continually, hopefully improving. And, something I think that came up earlier, we were talking about podcasting and so forth, in the curated image versus the kind of free flowing that I wanted to talk about was, they're both right. Like they're both true, I think that people think that whatever, like the version of me that is like, well, I don't know what to say right now. That's the real Jack Donovan, like that. No, the real me is what I spent hours and hours and hours trying to write in a room so that I said what I wanted to say in the most perfect way that I could. That is the best possible version of myself. And it is a true version of myself. And just the fact that I, swear like a sailor and talk in circles and whatever in real life doesn't negate that. They're both real, and I think that people lose track of that as well. I think that people are so used to that reality television, like, let's see who they really are.
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody shits. Like, okay, they shit. Wow. All right. Like everybody has flaws. Everybody like does stupid things, but that doesn't mean that's who they really are. I mean, I'm sure you could have followed, any great leader in world history around and be like, he's just a nerd, like that's, I mean, we're all human.
Yeah. And that's a really good point too, because obviously the speech that the emperor is going to give at the Colosseum is not going to be the same conversation he has with his chambermaid.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's the same person in different contexts. And what I think is a really strange thing is why people want to reject this idea of refining yourself in public, like that you talked a little bit about this with vulnerability, and I thought it was both awesome and hilarious because people have been misusing that word and describing it as a virtue,
right?
For the last decade, and it really doesn't make any sense. Like that vulnerability and being kind of a crappy version of yourself when you're presenting yourself to other people is somehow an admirable quality. And for some reason, it's a negative quality to want to present yourself as the absolute best version of whatever it is you're trying to talk about, or whatever it is you're trying to produce, or even just the way that you look, like Tanner is trying to promote.
Yeah. I mean, and again, it's so much of society, and it's like Nietzschean resentment, like how many, it makes mediocre people feel better if you're mediocre too. And so there's a big desire to pull down statues of people, pull down ideals of greatness, and kind of handicap everyone. And I go back to this all the time. And if you haven't read it, you should. It's really short. Harrison Bergeron. It's an old sci-fi short story, but it's perfect and perfectly describes equality and what people want. And it's basically the idea is that the story is that there's to enforce equality, everyone who has naturally better attributes is handicapped in some way. Like they're forcibly handicapped. Like they have to, if you're strong, then you have to carry weights around on you all the time. It's just so that everyone is like equally mediocre.
Right. And so there's like this arbitrary baseline that nobody has to rise up to, but everybody has to come down to so that we can all feel good about ourselves.
Exactly. And that's a terrible, terrible way to run a society. And obviously, there are a lot of people who are just not being as good as they can be because, it's not encouraged.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny because we want this kind of free pass when it comes to equality, whatever that is going to be. But the things that we admire the most and put the most monetary value on, and even like spiritual value, are things that require excellence. So if we start making everything equal, we no longer have iPhones. We can't just sit in my living room and have this virtual conversation with Jack down in Portland and then send it out to the rest of the universe where people can gain something from this and maybe leave this conversation with questions about maybe what they're doing in their life. And that's so much value that comes from billionaires, which everyone loves to hate, and people who are really proficient and obviously not equal to the rest of us when it comes to either their intelligence or their skill.
Yeah, there's a bunch of nerds in a room somewhere trying to figure out how to make the camera in the iPhone smaller. And that's, someone has to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like, and I even think about a lot of the conversations that kind of happen with economic equality too. It's like, for us to even be able to afford this magic computer that I'm able to save my entire life on, somebody had to buy that at some point for like $5,000 so that the rest of us could acquire this kind of technology for cheap. So it's just, when you start to really dig into that argument, it doesn't go very far when you try and rationalize.
It's a baby talk. There's a lot of things that are baby talk in the world, right? That's one of them.
Yeah.
And that's what I was, that vulnerability is weakness. That's baby talk too.
Yeah.
There's a big tendency to say just words. We have access to the coolest dictionary in the world called Wiktionary, and you can find everything. Everything you ever want to know. Oh, I mean, when I write, I will literally become a word nerd where I'll be like, do I want to use this word? Let me trace it back 5,000 years and see how I feel about it. Like what has this always meant? And I'll do that with a lot of words. I'll double check myself a lot because, I want to make sure I'm using the right word for the right thing. Or is there a better word that I could use? I think that's one of the fun parts of writing. And, but people have gotten so sloppy about, just projecting anything good. Anything that sounds good, they'll just attribute whatever qualities they want to it. It's a thin line between, putting out a positive message and then just, putting out Jell-O, like where you're just like, I'm going to make, here's some whipped cream that everyone can enjoy. That doesn't really mean anything. It has no substance or nutrition or whatever. It's just like, here's something nice. And
it's just satisfying to the ears and using words that flow well in a sentence, basically, but that doesn't really mean anything.
Right. And it's not, it becomes kind of insincere, and that's a hard line to straddle, because, I try to be as positive, and that's one of the things that I've definitely changed about my work over the past few years is that, I've done some angrier stuff in my life, and, at the end of the day, it's like The Way of Men came out in 2012, and I've helped a lot of dudes figure something out that they needed to figure out for themselves at some point. And I've made a lot of lives better. And I want to keep doing that. I mean, that's more important to me than, like getting everybody angry for a second, because they already have plenty to be angry about. I'm angry. I don't like to see the TV on in my house because I walk by it and then I hear it and it pisses me off. And so we all have enough to be angry about. And so, I want to put out a positive message, but you have to make sure that doesn't turn into just like, here's some nice sounding rainbow glitter words.
That's actually a really good transition in kind of the next thing I wanted to talk about, because, and I'll quote you. So you said that writers who connect with men authentically write things they themselves want to read or need to hear. These are virtues in working on myself, not just preaching to others. That was taken from the recent Stay Solar essay, which got, a gigantic response, and a gigantically positive response, pardon me. And so that kind of got me thinking too, just about myself and why I decided to start writing and why I decided to start this podcast. And it really wasn't to to talk to a bunch of other people and tell them how to solve their problems. It was actually to meditate on my own problems, very much like, Marcus Aurelius, who gets constantly misrepresented by kind of guys in our sphere, and the reason for the information.
Marcus Aurelius, fuck yeah!
Yeah, right.
He was hard, motherfucker. Well, not really.
Well, not really.
yeah.
Exactly. And you're now kind of promoting the same idea exactly with that quote, where you're now shifting things into a more positive light.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about, hey, everybody, look at me, I'm the expert, I have all the answers. Like, these are things that I'm working through, and I've found out that for me, this is true to me at this moment in time, which is very obviously different than some of the things that I believed before. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about Stay Solar, creativity, and what creativity has ultimately done for your own spiritual development. So maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Well, creativity, I mean, that's what I do. I mean, I went to art school. I mean, I've always been a creative guy. And, I think there are a lot of people who are like not very creative, and they kind of ride trends and whatever, and feed off other people in a vampiric kind of way. I mean, I don't even usually worry about telling people what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a mentality that you should never tell anybody what you're working on or whatever. But I've pretty much announced every book that I've ever written while I was writing it.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I don't have a problem with that is, man, I don't even know what I'm going to say yet. So you can't steal from me what I don't have. I'm not all the way there. I think I know where I'm going and I have an idea, but it reveals itself to me during the process. And that's why I think that, as you were saying, choosing to write because it helps you work through some things that you want to work through, is that writing is a thinking process.
Mm-hmm.
And writing is a thought process. And, sometimes I have to draft that 2 or 3 times before I know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I know what I'm talking about, then I can make it flow and have the good shit happen. But I need to sit down and figure out what I really need and make sure that it still makes sense. And, it's like sketching. And I think that a lot of people are happy with simple drawings. Mm-hmm. This is interesting to me because, like I said, I went to art school, and that's, was good at drawing since I was really, really young. And a lot of people will be like, I can't draw. And what they'll do is they'll put a piece of pencil to the paper, and they'll make a shape, and that's what they got.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they got. That's their drawing. And there's a certain style of drawing where you can get really good at that, and it's pretty amazing to actually watch. But when I draw, it takes forever. Mm-hmm. And it takes forever because I can see all the things that are wrong. Mm-hmm. And so that I slowly, if I'm looking at you right now and I'm drawing your face and I draw it there, then I have to be like, okay, are the eyes in the right place? Okay, that one's a little screwy. And then I'm erasing and I'm moving stuff around, and I can give me long enough and I'll make it like a photograph, because it'll just keep editing it, until it's right. And I think that a lot of people do that with writing, where they'll just like, look, here's what I wrote. And it's half a thought because they haven't gone back and be like, well, is this wrong? Is this wrong? Is this right? And done all the work.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing, with so many other things, that you can do in life. It's like, it's just about putting the work into, a good idea is a good idea, but then there's a lot of other technical shit you have to do to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
and realize that good idea.
Yeah. Writing, I think, is like, especially now that I've started to try to do it, I don't think I'm an excellent writer. I think I have some thoughts, and this has basically just been a practice for me to get better at it. And some people will read it and maybe they'll completely interpret it a different way than how I had it in my head, because I wasn't delivering that message as well as I could have, because I'm lacking some of those skills. But if somebody gains something from you putting your ideas out there, you're going to start to realize what exactly are the problems that you're solving. And that was something that you had talked about, was one of the most important things about writing keeping people engaged. And that's, are you solving a problem for them? Because otherwise they're not going to keep their attention. And, it's kind of like what you're talking about. Well, this is just really satisfying for my ears. So, with The Way of Men obviously being your most popular book, you were obviously answering a very important question that a lot of men didn't entirely have a clear answer to. And that was the universal definition of masculinity. But what I wanted to ask you about now, you mentioned you're writing another book. You're completely shifting things as far as, well, not completely, but you're starting to shift things in a new direction as far as how you're representing yourself and really focusing on doing good for other people, right? And so I was wondering, what is the universal problem that you're trying to solve now with Stay Solar? And is this something that we've been missing or have forgotten, much like when The Way of Men came out?
I think every essay, solves a good, if it's good, solves a problem. It's not necessarily, The Way of Men was a big one. People were always, like, how do I top that? I don't get to write the definition of masculinity twice. So there's like, what do you do after that? And then, but yeah, everything is about, solving a problem, and a More Complete Beast was, really talking about resentment, because it was a problem that I saw in a lot of dudes. It was a lot of guys who were just angry and felt like they had been cheated out of the way the world is supposed to be for them. And, in a way, it's kind of an entitlement thing. And, like, the world is supposed to be there and everything's wrong right now. And I'm really angry about it. And they almost were working themselves into a position where they were victims. And I believe in strength, but no one else does. So I'm a victim is basically what I was seeing happening all around me. So that was a question that was a problem that I saw. And then I wrote about what here's a better way to think about that. And so that's everything I do is like that, and it's helpful to, talk to guys, enough that you're like, these 5 guys all have the same problem. And then you're like, here's what I think the answer is. And that's, I think, always a good way to, write, because you're also figuring out what you think the answer is first, so it's kind of helping you as well. But with the book that I'm writing now, I'm very much trying to do the same thing that I was doing with The Way of Men, because you talked about paganism, we talked about Christianity, we talked about some things like that, and everyone wanted me to write, a heathen book. That was my, I did all of these cool rituals with another group, and then I had my, own, and I'm probably going to do one here in a month or two. And they wanted me to become an authority on that, or, talk about that and share what I was doing. And, I may put out some of the material that I was using, then, but the deeper I investigated all these things, you start to see, in the way that I looked at masculinity, like everybody said, the masculinity didn't mean anything because it was different everywhere. But then you look one level deeper, you look at the motivations, and the motivations are the same. And so that's what I like with The Way of Men. It's like, well, the motivations of, this culture on this continent and this culture on this continent are actually the same motivations. And so there's some commonality, and the same thing, I think, comes through with spirituality to some extent. And I was looking to kind of pull together an idea of masculine spirituality. And, obviously I started from the Germanic position that I was in, and then but you start to see that those are connected to earlier myths, and that this is all a train. And this train is talking about the same ideas. There's the same idea over and over again. And so I'm trying to kind of boil that down into something that isn't just stuck in one place or time. Like I'm, mostly German. And, but that was, this thing that I'm pulling from, there's like a 1,000-year period where they were doing it this kind of way.
Right.
They believed this kind of thing, but then that God had a different name before that and a different name after that. And what's the commonality and how you do trace it? And I think it's a very American thing to do as well. I mean, like, just in terms of like where we're at in society, you know, I'm not German. I mean, I'm, you know, German background, but I'm not from Germany. I'm from America. And, you know, there's everyone from America is from somewhere else, basically, you know, to an extent. You know, they're people from somewhere else. They're not coming. It's always been a big melting pot kind of culture. And so, you know, we're all kind of in a certain way, you know, on this continent, in a new place where we're looking for like, well, what's our culture? What are we about? And we're also intermixed with so many different groups of people, that I think it created a lot of confusion about, well, what's true and what's religion. And that's what Nietzsche was obviously responding to, even when it was just, you know, like trains and, you know, forth, bringing all these people together, and they're crisscrossing back and forth, and they're all these cultures meeting each other. And then they're realizing that, well, he has a valid idea and he has a valid idea. And like, maybe the idea I learned in my village isn't the only idea in the world. And, you know, and so we're all in that situation. And so, you know, I think that there's a lot of value, rather than just limiting something to like one area in one piece of history that's already gone. And there's some value in seeing what the commonality is and expanding it past that. Cause I want to hang out with all kinds of different dudes who have all kinds of different, you know, good qualities. And, you know, I don't want to be limited to like, well, I can only hang out with this dude because I can only hang out with dudes who are into the runes.
Right.
And, you know, like, I want to be able to hang out with, you know, this Asian guy and this whatever guy, whatever, because they all have good qualities that I want to learn something from. And so I think pulling together, you know, what version of spirituality is universal and masculine is kind of the project I'm working on now.
Right.
And so everything that I've done before is rooted in it, but so are a lot of other things.
Yeah, because you're kind of coming from this place now where you're drawing influence from all these other places, not only because of the commonalities, but what you can learn from the differences in all of them. And that, you know, like you were kind of saying, every culture has their own version of what's masculine, pardon me, but they're all fundamentally revolving around the same ideas. But how can you bring them together to present something that is not necessarily biased to this one past mythology or way of believing in something, because it's changing all of the time. So if it's changing all of the time within its little compartment, then it's already subject to influence and outside influence. So why can't we continue to influence this with all these other good ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like I said, it's just all the same, and you just start to see all those connections. And I mean, and things come full circle for you in a weird way. I mean, the first tattoo I ever got was actually, you know, because it was the 90s. It's you know, like the bicep thing around the classic barbed wire band. I got the first. It's not a barbed wire. It's actually because it's pictures of a dude, drawings of a dude fighting what are probably bulls, that I took from an art history book. It was an urn from Crete. And now it's like all the stuff that I'm going to right now is actually like, hey Zeus, how you doing? Like, you know, it's and this.
I was going to bring that up too, because
it becomes the same thing, because Zeus is the deus, and the same concepts all come together. And that's one of the things I looked at too. It's like, well, if you take out the spooky part of Odin, that is probably a lot of it is a Christian projection of what demonized the last religion. And
because they were obviously mortal enemies. So obviously Christianity putting their God or Jesus Christ in the light, and everything else is in the darkness. So stay away from that.
Yeah. But then you look at this undercurrent and like, well, Odin turns into an eagle. Well, Zeus did that too a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then, then you have this very, the whole all father concept is very old,
like the all father of masculinity.
Yeah. Well, like the all, yeah, exactly. Yeah. The all father, but yeah, the all father concept. I mean, that's the original idea of God is a father.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's like the deus pater. It's and then obviously you have your Zeus, and you have the Roman counterparts, and obviously the Odin as all father, and there's something like that in all these cultures, and then that's an interesting thing that like, well, men envision God as a father, a father figure to model themselves after. I mean, it's very simple,
right?
Like, why did they that idea has always been the same.
Why have you decided, or not decided, that probably wasn't a conscious choice, that's silly, but what has brought kind of like a new focus towards some of the Greek philosophers and Roman philosophers and Greek mythology that you're now drawing from in a lot of your writing? You quote Plato a lot. You've now began to finally start writing about Marcus a little bit. So what's kind of pointing you in that direction?
Well, I mean, that's, it's always kind of funny with paganism and heathenry is like that. The thing that we have the most source material for is the thing that you see all these people who want to be Vikings, and we have very little source material for that. And then we have so much source material for the ancient Greeks and Romans.
Yeah,
so much. And it always amazed me that was not turned into more of a modern reconstructionist movement. There are people who do that, but it's not half as big as like heathenry or whatever.
No, because heathenry almost kind of has like this occult tie to it. And for some reason, we've attached, especially men who talk about masculinity frequently or really push, a brooding version and philosophy behind masculinity, have painted it in darkness. And I kind of wanted to ask why you thought that darkness follows being tough and hardened, and why paganism has drowned itself in that, because there's so much darkness and witchery and all that kind of stuff. But it seems kind of disingenuous to me that to be, something to aspire to, that you need to hide in the dark, that you need to have this darkness about you and lack of kindness and lightness. So why are you now walking in the light while everyone else is promoting this idea of strength through darkness under the hood of under the shade of these kind of occult concepts that don't really even make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I think it's it's the way that teenagers perceive masculinity. Like I'm going to be angry all the time, and I'm going to
going to wear black shirts with.
It's all about anger, and it's all hard style, and it's all about anger, and so forth, and I think that there's some use to that, because it's the job of men to deal with darkness, to deal with whether it's physical chaos or some kind of external chaos. It's the job of men to interact with that, because they're basically protectors, and so they have to go out and interact with darkness and whatever. And so you have to harden yourself to that a little bit, and so it's part of the growing process. I think that it's like with lifting. I think a lot of people start out, they have to get real angry. They have to get real angry, and they have to hate themselves a little bit. Like, why am I so weak? And they have to hate themselves, and they have to like get angry and whatever, and everything's about anger. And then, if you notice, guys who've been doing it for a long, long, long time, and they've already reached a certain progress, they do it because it makes them happy. And they really don't have to be angry anymore.
No, not at all.
They want to get psyched up, but it's not about anger anymore. And the same thing is true, I think, for most aspects of masculinity. Obviously, there's that that threshold where you have to harden yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so people are attracted, obviously, to that kind of hard imagery and so forth. But you do have to, I think, extend beyond that, especially after I think you've achieved a certain level. I mean, I never want to say like after you've achieved masculinity, because that's not real. It's because it's just an ideal.
It's just something you're attempting to embody at all times.
Yeah, you're going in a direction. But once you've like gotten, some points along that road, and you feel a little bit more comfortable in who you are, I think that's a point where you can, become a force that's positive around you, not focusing on anger and all that all the time. Because that's not good to be around.
No.
Like what kind of leader do you want to be around? Do you want to be around a leader who's like, focused on anger all the time?
Or someone who offers encourage,ment and advice
someone who's like positive to all the people around you. That's why I really like the solar imagery. It's like you're a source of warmth and light to everyone around you.
It's funny because people
you can still be strong as shit because the sun is terrifying. But you can still be, the sun is terrifying, but it's still like you can be strong enough that you have strength to spare, and not just be constantly like having to beat people over the head with it. Right. And I think that a lot of the guys that I've talked to who are, have seen combat and so forth, they get to a point where they're either going to go to a really dark place and spend the rest of their lives with a head in a bottle or in a shotgun or whatever. They either they're going to hang out in the dark place, or that they're going to be like, I've done darkness. I've dealt with more darkness than most people, and now I'm looking for something positive.
Yeah, because otherwise you're kind of just role playing and buying into your insecurities, right? Because when you do see true darkness, like these guys, like if you've never blown somebody's head off, you don't really have the context to then go about, what's the word? Fantasizing about being a militant. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Well, you mean, are you saying that you don't drink, your favorite drink isn't like blood from the skulls of your enemies or whatever? Is it whatever meme lord bullshit that people like promote? Like, the problem we have today is people don't drink enough from their skulls of their enemies.
Yeah, it's just it's absolute nonsense.
Yeah, okay, you're jerking yourself off. That's not. There's a very short list of people who have done that.
Yeah. And they're probably deeply traumatized by the fact that they're
deeply traumatized, or they're like, "Fuck it, I drink from." All right, hey, that was cool. I mean, a lot of people did some weird shit in Nam, and some of them came back and had big problems, and then some of them probably just went out and be like, "Oh, now I'm president of a company."
Yeah,
some people can process that better than others. It says that the guys who are really traumatized by violence are the guys who aren't good at it. I don't know if that's true or not. I can't weigh that. But I just found the music.
Yeah, it's just really funny because you mentioned that the sun and how that or the warmth and the light of the sun, right? But also this power and all ruling, all enveloping source that it is that creates life and destroys life. But for some reason, we've attached light and warmth with the feminine. Why do you think that is?
I think that, a lot of people do that. Just like I said, they're looking for anger. We live in a very feminized society. So they're looking for the opposite of that.
Right.
And so, but the thing is, like, you're letting women steal light. At that point, like, wait, no, this is we were doing this for a long time.
Right.
Like I said, you look at the Greek gods are really the Christian gods, and I mean, all these cultures. I mean, they're looking up to some dude in the sky who is like terrifyingly powerful. Like I was reading the Rig Veda the other day. It's, like you're looking through Indra, and you have this idea of this, again, this king who rules things, and he has this terrifying lightning, and he rules from above, really. And so they're surrounded by light, And because really, if anything, the feminine is darkness. And I don't want to go too far down that road, but I mean,
this 1.5 second caption is going to be taken and put on YouTube, and 100%. You're never going to hear the end of it.
Yeah. I mean, well, maybe it is a common theme in mythology that the feminine is associated with darkness and chaos, and basically, that's what the sun does. It makes light makes things intelligible, and it allows us to put our world in order and understand things. And it makes things, light is science. It shines light on something and reveals what it is, whereas darkness is, mystery and chaos. You don't understand it. And so, I mean, I think the job of men has always been actually to create light in the middle of darkness. And that, to create order where there is not order.
Right.
And, I'll stop there because I'll reveal too much about anyway. But it's, I think that's what, that's what we do is we create and defend order. And that's the work of light.
Right.
And I think that's why men have always, that we were building cathedrals to light and on all this stuff and the Parthenon and all this shit. We were doing this for all of human history. So the idea that that's a female thing is kind of, ridiculous.
Yeah. You had mentioned also, I don't know if you still abide by this, but that stay solar was kind of your version of Stoicism. Is that something that you're still kind of standing by?
Well, no. I mean, actually other people said that. I've always I was talking about the stay solar thing before I even really sat down and read a lot of Stoics. I mean, because people started saying that this is a lot like Stoicism. And so I had to go and see where the, differences and similarities were. But I mean, I wouldn't say it's my version of Stoicism. I would just say, there are some similarities. Is what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's kind of funny because you had made that post about Stoicism, and it was included, I think, in the same essay that you wrote. But I think it's really funny because I had only gotten about halfway through Meditations, and this week I decided to just blast through and read the rest of it because I wanted to get a complete understanding before I asked you about this. And it was really interesting how you pointed out the fact that all of these men who do associate darkness with masculinity idolize somebody who wrote something only for themselves and was actually a very gentle person that doesn't really at all embody this version of Stoicism that they're all talking about. So what do you think about that, and why guys have attached Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism to being a tough guy?
Well, I mean, it's a lack of engagement with the source material, really. I mean, because the word Stoic, and again, it's a word that's taken on a life of its own. I mean, I believe the Stoa, isn't it wasn't it a building, where they all talked in that particular building? That's where they gave their speeches about philosophy. Yeah. I think it was called the Stoa, and then it became Stoicism.
They became basically like a communion of guys who would all think about the same things, basically.
Yeah. But the word Stoic has basically taken on a life of its own in the sense it means unemotional, and which is good in the sense of emotional control. But I think the way a lot of men perceive it is Stoicism equals harden the fuck up. And so then they've kind of projected all of that imagery onto it, this harden the fuck up, rub some dirt on it thing, which is not 100% wrong, but there is that aspect of Stoicism that is don't be affected by things, and don't whine. And that's great. But I think they just projected some like I said, rub some dirt on it mentality onto Marcus Aurelius, who really that wasn't exactly what he was talking about.
No.
There's some overlap and it makes some sense, but I'm a Stoic because like I'm tough. It's not really exactly the right thing.
Yeah. It's not the best representation of him, and I think, like you said, maybe it's a misunderstanding of the source material itself. Because when you read through it, I read that, and by the time I got to the end, it was like Marcus sounded like a yogi. Like he is about peace and being in kind of a state of almost meditative self-awareness and almost disconnection from the material, disinterest in fame and all these other kind of things. And to me, that came off way more like yogic philosophy than, like what Jocko Willink is talking about.
Right.
Yeah. So, I thought it was interesting because most of the guys that are listening to us are constantly sharing memes about Marcus Aurelius, and it's a very confusing message. But there was another thing I kind of wanted to touch on too about this article that you wrote, and it's kind of crazy because you put this thing out, and I feel like this is one of the most important things that you've written. And I think part of the sentiment is the fact that, and this might even be a little bit cliche, but this idea that it's actually okay to change your mind and okay to change things about yourself for the better, to walk in the light, kind of how you are, versus maybe coming from a place where you're sharing your thoughts out of anger or trying to promote an idea that's a little bit surrounded by darkness. And, you've experienced, even some of your own darkness that has followed you around, some of the ideas that you put out there that other people like Marcus Aurelius have taken in the wrong direction. And I wanted to ask you why you think our culture wants to bury people in their past, why human evolution is something that we're no longer striving for.
Well, I mean, we live in this kind of gotcha gossip culture that that's what the media does to a certain extent, but it's a way to control people. This idea of collapsed time that like the media has a lot of times where like, I found a time when you said something that's not like the thing that you're saying now. Well, that was 30 years ago. Like
I was 15. I didn't even know what I was talking about.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's amazing that that people were expected to maintain the same opinion that they had when they're 25. Mm-hmm. Which means that they learned nothing and didn't grow at all. They're basically not even self-aware. They're not thinking. Mm-hmm. They're not examining their ideas. They're not, this idea of consistency. Now, I think that as a writer, I have a responsibility to show my work, mm-hmm. In terms of the math of it, it's like a math problem. I need to show you how I got from point A to point B. I just can't be like, and now I'm about this. Yeah. And I can't just like shift gears. It has to make sense.
Because people have actually taken what you've written. Because people have taken what you've written as gospel at some point.
Yeah.
So when you start telling,
control that, mm-hmm. you can't control that. And that's the magic of being a writer, is that like, you don't get to say what people do with your work. Mm-hmm. People are going to say a good thing that I saw on Aubrey Marcus thing the other day was he put out a meme or something about like no one sees the same movie, mm-hmm. and there's some truth to that. The idea that like you have all your baggage that you're bringing into it, and mm-hmm. that affects the way that you interact with the movie or one of my essays. Mm-hmm. Your own baggage is going to affect what you see there. Right. My job is to do the best communication of what I believe and want to say at that moment, and get it across in a clear enough way that you can't mess with it that much, mm-hmm. but you still can. People can still project whatever they want onto something, mm-hmm. and there's just nothing that you can do about that because everyone's going to take something a different way. and it's cool. Sometimes I say something that I didn't even think was important. And they're like, that was really important to me. Like, great. And other times, people will miss a point or just, I've had, all kinds of different political groups, like opposing political groups, like, take pieces of my work and say like, this is what, this is exactly what we've been saying.
Yeah.
And like, it doesn't necessarily make sense. I just remember years ago watching libertarians argue about whether or not the essay "Violence is Gold" and violated whatever it is, the non-aggression principle. I think that they have like I'm like, this is interesting. Was not thinking about anything like that, but I watched.
I didn't even consider you guys when I wrote this. I didn't
even think about this. Yeah. But and so that's going to happen all the time. And, and I've always been concerned about this is that, someone could read The Way of Men or Violence is Golden or something and justify some fucking stupid thing, like go shoot somebody or go do it. And someday something like that's going to come back on me. I'm like, well, that's not what I said, because I have to be careful about what I actually say versus, but someone's going to take something like that and considering a rallying cry and they're going to ignore all the like caveats and clauses that I put here to say, hey, I'm saying this, but not this. They'll skip over that part, and then they'll do whatever they want.
My hand was covering it when I read this.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't control that, but it's a part of the game.
Yeah, and people seem to really want you as a writer or an influencer, a public figure, to have to answer for what the people who interpret your work incorrectly do. I think is strange. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's again the association smear stuff that everybody does. Like, well, did you know that these people like your work? Okay. Okay. So people who like my work, I'm responsible for them. Yeah.
There's
8 billion people out there, and 90% of people on YouTube who are reading this are psycho anyway. So you're gonna have a few people that are gonna read this and take what you said the wrong way.
I mean, I pulled the numbers recently, and because I normally don't track it, but in English, I sold 32,000 units last year. So I'm guessing that most of those people would hate each other. About 20, like 50, maybe 50% of those guys would really get along with one another, and then a lot of the other ones would just like be at each other's throats.
Yeah.
And so that's just part of the reality of it.
Yeah. It's interesting too, there's not to do with what people were talking about, because I think there is some legitimacy to criticizing fluff, because there is fluff that really smart, influential people put out there too. But I think it's also important to remember that, and I think this was something you had actually said before, is that there is a guy for every person that's kind of searching for something, and they may be ultimately sharing the same message, but it's really important that we have different people that have a different take on similar sentiments so that it can be received by different types of people.
Oh, 100%. I mean, and I would never want it to be any other way. I mean, that's the opposite of a lot of things. I mean, that's monoculture, right? If every message is like presented in the exact same aesthetic and the exact same way, whatever. And we're not all, that's one of the big kind of, stupid things about some more baby talk, like someday we'll all, the world will live as one. We'll all be in the same, we'll all believe exactly the same thing, and that'll never happen. And I would never want it to. I mean, a perfect example of what you were saying is Elliot Hulse. I mean, I got a chance to hang out with him when I was in Florida, and we got to talk about some ideas and back and forth in a cab, and we went out to a nightclub, and we were bullshitting and a little bit, and I really like the guy. He actually his message is for a different kind of guy, but like I saw something come up in his feed that he wrote today, and I'm like, yep. I wouldn't do that. Yep. Yeah. You know, like it's, you know, like that's not me, but like there's, you know, 10 things in there that he's saying that I would totally agree with.
Mm-hmm.
And, but the guy who responds to his delivery and the
Right.
guy who responds to his aesthetic and his, you know, just the way he presents his idea, there's going to be a different guy that responds better to me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of, I mean, and also, you know, you just got to be yourself too.
Yeah.
I mean, like I could make so much money if I just got super tactical.
Yeah.
Way of man. I mean, if I just went like and just did gun stuff and like, you know, did a million operator things and whatever, and was just, but I mean, it'd all be bullshit because I'm never going to be an operator because I'm 45 years old. And you know, so that's bull. I mean, it would all be like fantasy role playing. But you know, if I just, you know, went that direction with it and played to that world, there's a lot of money there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I mean, that's not really who I am.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I mean, I am kind of a, you know, I like mythic imagery and that kind of thing, and you know, I could make a lot more money and do a lot more stuff if I did it did something differently. If I went more the action hero route,
right?
And but you know, sorry, I'm going to sit in front of a neon sun sign and meditate on a mountaintop.
Yeah.
That's a little bit more consistent with my personality.
Yeah. And I think it's ultimately like, I think overall, even if the method or the means in which to get to the point that a lot of these messages from influential kind of, you know, podcasters have suddenly become like these people that we're looking to, obviously, for the way to do things better, right? Whether it's or podcasters or writers, books, like that's always kind of been the way it is, but it's becoming very prevalent because it's easy to consume. So, you know, when some guy listens to Marcus, you know, he might be someone that just wants to do better in the way that makes sense to him. And ultimately what you're talking about is talking to a certain type of men that are just trying to do better in a way that makes sense to you. And that seems to be pretty universal with all of these different people, even if we disagree on the way that we're getting to that answer.
Yeah. And like I said, a lot of it's just aesthetic.
Yeah.
You know, like this, I'm into this vibe. I'm into this vibe. This is more who I am than that. Yeah. And, you know, a lot of it's just that. And, you know, it's like what your favorite movies are probably going to influence, you know, what influencer you like the best. You know, like it's, and that's good because it allows for creativity. Because if we all had to look the same and do the same thing to say the same, to give the same good advice, that would be really boring.
Yeah, totally. And you had mentioned Elliot Hustle, so I wanted to kind of transition into talking about the 21 convention a little bit, because that's the convention that obviously you're talking about.
Sure.
Somebody that might be listening to this might not know what that is. So you just spoke, I think, in October in Orlando for your most recent one, and that's where a lot of these kind of new ideas you're drawing from, I think. So maybe you can kind of talk about what the 21 convention is all about and what is the red pill movement, and maybe you can explain what these guys exactly are talking about. And I think you've kind of suggested that is a outdated metaphor, which I agree with. But for the people that might be interested in that, and maybe those are the kind of guys whose message would resonate with somebody that's listening to this, maybe you can talk about it a bit.
Yeah, well, the 21 convention, I was really excited when they first invited me to speak at it, because I was looking for, again, something that was kind of when I first wanted to shift towards something more positive. And, you know, it was like, oh, this is all about a conference about men who want to make their lives better. Sign me up. You know, like that sounds great. That's what I want to do. And so, you know, it's definitely... The red pill, I think, is kind of this idea that, you know, the idea is that you're fed about women specifically, I think, in, you know, high school and through the media and so forth. You know, there's a lot of guys who really believe that if you just bring a woman flowers and are nice to her and do whatever she says, then she'll love you forever and sex and all that stuff. And that's, I think, you know, there's the red pill is like the dudes who, like, at some point are forced to realize that that's a lie.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how the world works. That's not how women work. And a lot of things, they were just, sold a lot of, like we've been saying, words that sound nice together.
Yeah.
And they have no representation with truth. And, in truth, they have to interact with women in a particular way that, in order to maintain a successful relationship and all that. And there's a lot of guys talking about that. And a lot of those guys who are talking about, strategies for handling women in situations and so forth. I mean, that's a lot of what that movement originally was. Especially, it started out, there was a lot of like pickup artists and stuff. And then they kind of graduated beyond that, because that's kind of, that's some level 1 stuff. And then they graduated beyond that. Now there's a lot of guys talking about like, well, how do you create a family culture, for your family and your wife and your kids and all that kind of stuff, which is very positive. And so, it's just, I think, a positive movement for men in a realistic way of looking at the world. But there's been a real shift in that movement, specifically in the 21 convention, among all those guys, towards doing something more positive. Right. Giving guys a more positive message rather than just being angry at feminists. That's again, it's, it becomes resentment and victimhood and all that. And so a lot of those guys, they'll still go hard. The guy who runs the convention, who I really like, Anthony Dream Johnson. This dude has been putting on conventions for men since he was, I think, 17 years old. Like he basically dropped out of business school and just started his convention. This is his whole life, is making conventions for men. And this is what he does. And he's committed to it and he cares about it. And I think it's sincere. I don't think it's a money-making scam, because there are people who are just doing like, let me write a book on manliness real quick so I can make a quick buck and then I'll go write about something else.
Yeah. There's just a tool to promote yourself and get on podcasts and interviews. And then you're going to run some shitty retreat where everybody hugs each other and it costs $1,500.
Yeah. I have to figure out how to work that deal, man. To run a $1,500 retreat where they don't hug each other. Like, I gotta get in that game. I need like a business manager or something. To figure that out for me, because it's a little bit beyond my scale. It's anyway. I think it's a really good thing, and he's really sincere about it. And he does like to push people's buttons and troll a little bit. I mean, they're doing a thing this year called the 22 convention that's gotten a lot of press. Like, he's been on some international talk shows and stuff like that, because they're basically having all the speakers be men, but the 22 convention is for women to come and learn how to be better women. And he did that on purpose, because he was just poking. He's poking at them just to play the game a little bit. But I think that his heart's in the right place and he's trying to do something good. And I don't know how many more times I'll speak at it, because just because speaking is a big job, coming up with a whole presentation, because that was kind of my joke. I mean, when I started doing all the rituals and the pagan stuff, I'm like, I want to give a 15-minute speech covered in ash and blood. I don't want to do like an hour in 4K
in a tie, and it's hot.
Yeah. I mean, that's just not my vibe. But it's just hard to. That's a big thing. I mean, that's a job. If you're a keynote speaker and you do TED Talks and stuff like that, that's a particular a job, and it's a skill set. And I just don't think that's the best way to present my particular message all the time. But I really liked the speech I did in October, and I hope that it'll come out relatively soon. I think it'll probably come out within the next few months. He always holds them for kind of members first, and then then eventually everything goes live to YouTube. Like, you can see my former speeches at the 21 convention. They're all up on YouTube now. So it's like I said, I don't know how many more times I'll do it, but that's just because. But I totally support all the stuff that those guys are doing, and if it makes sense for me to do it again, I absolutely will.
Yeah, and the reason I kind of wanted to ask you about it was actually because of the controversy that's now kind of surrounded with the 22, and that's not from like, I want the dirt on this guy. It's I actually wanted to get an inside view from you, because I believe that you're very honest about what you talk about. And I think it's really hilarious that he's kind of just played on the Trump card with the red hats and the controversial statuses. And somehow people are still buying that. and getting really upset about it. And
yeah. He's definitely taking that as a model. Like here's how I'm gonna fuck with you and push your buttons. And he's definitely having fun with that. I personally wouldn't want that kind of attention. Like I try to avoid that myself, but because it's a lot to manage.
Yeah,
that's it. Once you start getting like real media, like that's you need an assistant. Like there's stuff going on there, and a legal team. But yeah, he's definitely, I think, like I said, his heart's in the right place, and I think he's trolling people and pushing their buttons a little bit. But I think what he wants to do is sincere.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was at the table when he's like, so I think we're just gonna have women come to the thing, but we're only gonna have male speakers. And I was just like, you sure you want to do that? He's like, just for the first one, we're gonna do just for the first one. We're gonna do that. I was like, all right, you have fun with that.
Yeah,
but, you know, because you knew what was coming. He knew it was coming. You know, like what was gonna happen from it. He's a smart guy.
Yeah, that's the thing too, right? You know, it's funny because you know it's obviously going to be offensive to some people. That's exactly why he did it. And
sure.
And now what he's presented to people has been seen by like 50 million audience viewers.
Yeah.
So it was very effective to do it that way. You know, and that's why I actually wanted to give the opportunity, because you know this guy, you've been at the conventions that he's put on. Mm-hmm. And I think people get so stuck behind the jokes because we have a really hard time taking jokes anymore, where we're not actually willing to see that, well, okay, you know, he's got a crude sense of humor, but what this overall message is and what he's doing for men, and probably what he's going to do for women because of his track record with the other conventions that he's does, it's overall positive. It's mostly just that we can't take a joke, and that's why I wanted an kind of like an inside perspective on the source.
The funny thing about it is too that like you know, it's voluntary. Mm-hmm. It's not like a reprogramming camp where he's corralling women into the high school gymnasium to like reprogram them or something. It's only women who are interested who are going to come and pay the ticket and do the thing. So I mean, it's not like it's all voluntary.
Yeah.
And so, and, you know, I think I had one of the other speakers, AJ Cortez. I had him on my podcast, and I think he talked about the speech that he was going to give. And like, you know, he's going to talk about men and women in harmony, and like, it's very, not, I mean, it's not like they're going to stand up on stage and, you know, tell women that they need to, like, you know, unlearn their college education and go and you know, get back in the kitchen and be barefoot or whatever. But I mean, obviously they're going to say largely positive things and try and give some advice. And I think that, you know, I've actually had a lot of women contact. I wouldn't say a lot. I think that'd be an exaggeration, but I've had several women over the years write me and thank me for writing The Way of Men, because actually they read it and they understand their boyfriends better. Mm-hmm. Like they're like, okay, now I see what he's trying to do. Mm-hmm. Like I had no idea, because they have a completely different frame of reference for reality. Mm-hmm. And you know, so if they can understand a man's perspective a little bit more, maybe they don't have to fight all the time. Mm-hmm. You know, like that's maybe they're going to have a better relationship. So, I mean, there's some value in women actually being mansplained to about what masculinity is, at least. You know?
Yeah, and it would never be an issue if there was a conference where women were talking to men about how they can be better partners. You know?
Oh no, they would be heroes. They'd be on the cover of magazines.
Right?
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting, and you know, I think the other part about it is you know, we really want to shut down as a culture this idea of competence and any means to get there, you know, and it's a very confusing message, I think, for men, because, you know, we're kind of talking about the dynamics between men and women and this convention and what they're hoping to accomplish from that, you know, but it's very obvious and been statistically proven that women are more attracted to competent, assertive men. But we're also attaching arrogance and this false interpretation of ego to being assertive to looking assertive, like we talked about earlier. And ultimately, women aren't gaining competent or even attractive partners because men aren't working on themselves, and men aren't in turn becoming fulfilled and establishing themselves in the world. So who's running this ship? Because nobody is gaining. There's a net loss with this movement.
Well, I don't know about who's running it, but I mean, obviously, there are all kinds of levels of culture, and it's fascinating, really, if you really think about it, because, we're relatively middle-class dudes, and we see one layer of culture, and then there's other layers of culture that we actually don't even have exposure to. Even if it's right there in front of our face, we could find it if we wanted it to. We don't even know what to look for.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I actually was just following a bunch of high-end men's magazines that I've never heard of, just on Instagram today. I was going, because one thing led to another. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Oh, this is kind of cool. And it's all like, at a shirt costs $500 kind of level, and there's this whole world that's there. But it's not accessible to the rest of us, so we don't see it. And so we're talking about kind of mainstream, super accessible culture that's accessible to kind of the lowest common denominator. And, I don't think anyone's really operating with what is good for society, because actually we don't have a society. We have just the world. I mean, we have global commerce and so forth, and nationalism is not, nationalism is unpopular. And so it's like, there's no show to run.
Right.
Like where's the border of who are we trying to make better?
Right.
Just everybody or whatever. I mean, no one's really invested, like, the phrase skin in the game. No one's really invested in, the future of this civilization that doesn't really exist because it doesn't have boundaries. Like this, we're not protecting our culture. And how are we going to make these people in our culture better? Because we're not defining who the people in our culture are. We're not defining, everything's porous.
Yeah.
And so, so there's no really forward thinking aspect of it. It's almost like reactive to technology.
Right.
In the sense of, like, when you hear, like, I follow these guys who talk about flow states, because I was kind of interested in that, because I think, I went through a phase where I was looking at it, flow states as Otr, as far as like Odin and the, like inspiration and so forth. And is that like correlate to like a flow state? And I think that's a really interesting kind of topic to think about. But, I follow some guys who talk about flow states and so forth. And they're like saying the future is faster, and all these things about, like, and this is what AI is going to do, and it's like we're almost reacting to whatever technology is going to come in. We're not steering technology is steering us. And I think that's just how it's going to be,
right?
Because people are always going to be one-upping each other and trying to, like, I can make a bigger nuclear warhead. The same thing, like, I can make a faster computer, and I can make a computer that is now smarter than you. And then they're going to make a smarter computer than that. And it's just going to keep going down that direction, because the person who stops competing at that point will lose.
Right.
So they're going to keep going in that direction. That is a terrible idea. I don't care who you are. All of our dystopian fantasies are about AI, but but everyone's also like, then you watch commercials where, like, they have whatever Morgan Freeman or something tell you how great it's going to be.
Yeah.
Like, AI is going to improve our lives in so many ways. I don't even have to finish my emails anymore. They just fill themselves in, and like all
until you're part of a slave farm of humans controlled by robots.
Exactly. Like, it's like we've foreseen how this ends in every single sci-fi movie that's ever come out, and yet we're still doing it. And why? Because it's human competition, and they're just going to keep doing it, and whatever. I mean, really, if we were smart, we would just shoot everyone that works on AI, but, like, that's not going to happen. So, they're just going to keep working on it, and then eventually the computers will enslave us. And
we'll see our imminent destruction, and everyone who claimed to be right about it will get their gold medal, and then they'll be like force fed through a grinder.
Well, yeah, it'll be like the Cthulhu robot thing, like he'll eat you last, you know, like that.
Man, hey, I don't know. I just feel like we're smarter than everybody, and that's why we've thought about these things.
What's sad? Like I said, they've all thought about it too.
Yeah, they're still doing it.
They're still doing it. They're like, fuck it. Let's make the supercomputers.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why like so many other issues that used to matter just don't anymore. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And even just like going back to Pooh, this idea that you were talking about, how we don't really have a global culture that we all pretend to care about. And the reason I wanted to bring it back to you is because I kind of mentioned in the comments on one of your posts, but I just got back from Mexico and I realized how true that is, because what's important to us and what's relevant to us. And even if we're just talking about this podcast, like in the entirety of the internet, there might only be 500,000 people who would give a shit about what we're talking about. You know what I mean? But then I go to a place like Tepoztlan in rural Mexico where I was in Santiago, and I'm driving through these slums and I'm seeing emaciated dogs that literally even the dogs look depressed, and you've got children that are sleeping on a concrete floor and it's filthy. And, there's another, a family that I see babies running around in garbage because they live next to the dump. And so the family built their entire house out of garbage. And so we really like to believe that we have the capacity to care about everybody. Yeah. But it's just not something that we're really good at.
No, you can't. I mean, you can't, you just don't have the processing power in your brain. I mean, the supercomputer that takes us over might have that processing power, but the actual human brain can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can't even conceive of that many people, really. I mean, 8 billion people in the world. Like, what does that even mean?
Mm-hmm.
Can you picture a billion people? You can't even picture really more than like a football stadium. And that's a blur, really. If you think about it, like how many people are in the foot, you can't see their faces.
No.
You can just imagine that there are that many people. And much beyond that, it's just you might as well just fill them in with AI, with CGI. But same difference. The AI will do it. But whatever.
Yeah. So outside of our understanding, right?
Yeah. You can't really conceive of it, and that's why I've always advocated limit yourself to things that you're caring about. I mean, people close to you and people connected to you and so forth. And I was just talking to my buddy Greg about the other night because he asked me about, because he heard me say something like that, and I'm like, that's some old self-help advice. I mean, I think the first guy who really wrote the graphic, and you can do an image search on it, is the guy who wrote like the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Right. Yeah.
That dude, he wrote the original drawing. As far as I know, maybe someone did it before him and he stole it from them. But it's the same thing that everybody talks about, and it's just good advice. And it's basically like, if you concentrate on the things that you can influence, your influence in the world grows. And if you concentrate on the things that you cannot influence, then your actual influence decreases.
Mm-hmm.
And and that's what everybody's focused on, like the news. And okay, you can talk about the coronavirus all day long, but what impact does that have? What impact do you have on it?
Yeah.
0. Wash your hands. All right, cool. Wash your hands. Maybe if you're in an airport, you might want to wear masks for a little bit. But all these people talking about this thing that they have no control over.
Mm-hmm.
And then same thing with politics, like who's going to get elected, Okay, they're going to talk about this thing that, again, they have no control over. They have whatever 350 millionth of a fucking say in what happens on that. And it's but if you're concentrated on growing your own business, you're going to make more money and then have more influence in the world around you and so forth. But if you're focused on the news, it changes nothing for you.
Yeah, it's something that a lot of people get really angry at Jordan Peterson about. But when he goes out there and he says, you have no business trying to restructure you have no business trying to change the complex structures of the world if you can't even clean your room, right? And it just seems like something that I can't really figure out why people don't see the importance of it. But because we can't take care of everybody as individuals, if everybody just took care of the 5 people that they care about, everybody would be getting taken care of.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Well, except for the people that nobody cares about. But we're just jerks. We'll just let them perish. And then,
yeah. But yeah, I guess I just kind of to sort of close off the discussion. I know you said you're writing a book, but is there anything else that you're kind of working on that's in your immediate focus aside from just pumping out good conversations on your podcast and getting this book done?
Mostly getting the book done. I mean, obviously, it's basically, I kind of said, that's why I closed my retail store, because I was like, I just want to do jiu-jitsu and book. Right? This is what I want to do for the next 6 months. And obviously the podcast, just focus on that because I think the book is important and I want to get it done this year, because it's going to also be a platform for whatever I do next. Because I have to, it's like I have to explain what I'm talking about in the best way that I can, so then I can move onto the next thing,
right?
And figure out whatever that is. Probably move to another city at some point and do something different, but or build on that, I would say. It's just basically that right now. And I'm the only thing I have planned this year is that I am going to Switzerland.
Oh, nice!
And I'm really excited about that. That's what I'm going to the house where Nietzsche wrote Zarathustra.
Awesome.
So I'm going to the village where Sicils Maria. And so I have that planned. Hopefully the coronavirus doesn't keep me from going there. But that's my big vacation for the summer. And I'm going to go there and take a lot of pictures and make a lot of content, do that kind
Wicked.
of stuff.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. I look forward to checking that out. And before you go, maybe you can let everybody know who's listening, who doesn't already know who you are, where they can check out the Start the World podcast and how they can find you online, and where they can buy your books.
Hi, I'm Jack Donovan, author of The Way of Men, and you can find my books on Amazon. Definitely. Obviously, Amazon. My website is jack-donovan.com. I'm trying to kind of accumulate some subscribers there. Just started putting my podcasts there on. There's a link to them at jack-donovan.com, and also they're up on YouTube under my name or Start the World. My Instagram is Start the World, and that's kind of where I interact with the public the most at this moment.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. This was episode 4 of Barbaric Wisdom. And I hope you guys take the time to check out the rest of Jack's work, because I think there's a lot of value there that people can gain from. So it was good talking to you, Jack, and thanks for coming on.
All right. Thanks, man.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Barbaric Wisdom. I'm Bronson Lee Norton. If you've been enjoying the podcast so far, be sure to subscribe to stay updated on the latest episodes. If you would like to show your support and help us continue to be able to bring your favorite guests onto the show, head on over to www.patreon.com/barbaricwisdom. That's www.patreon.com/barbaricwisdom.